is a perfect segue to our next speaker, Dr. Hubert Danso, on issues of bankability, financing, creditworthiness, de-risking, and leveraging partnerships. Over to you.
In 2 minutes, I understand.
In 2
Is that
minutes.
right? Well, look, and, I had the pleasure of chairing the Institutional Investor Task Group that was, providing input into the Investment Action Plan. And there are a number of things that sort of come up, but I think we've touched on them. I think the Honourable Minister's touched on them in terms of we need a new form of partnership. And, these conversations are really, they need to be frank and fair. And as institutional investors, we have very specific mandates. So we have to make sure that pensions get met. We have to ensure that future generations' endowments are delivered. So investability is really important to us. And I think what we really need to think about doing is how do we recharacterize the agenda? And I think the agenda has become very much a development finance agenda when it should actually potentially be a blended investment agenda. And I think if we can redefine that agenda, we will be able to crowd in more capital. I think, a lot of our colleagues talk about it in terms of the development community is trying to make investment developmental. And then you have a narrow set of opportunities. But perhaps what might give you a bigger, broader, scalable opportunity is to make development investable. And then you not only have access to the institutional money, but you have access to the global markets as well. And then African domestic institutional investors can then seed and anchor transactions and then crowd in bigger, broader players. So we really welcome the fact that the institutional investor public partnership framework, which is part of the African Union's 5% agenda, was highlighted in the initial report, because that looks at a new form of alignment between long-term institutional capital and domestic water-related infrastructure and resilient infrastructure investment needs. So that particular institutional investor public partnership is something that I think we should all really look into a lot more closely, because it gives specific alignment between long-term institutional assets and the types of projects that we're working on now, in particular water and water-resilient assets. So we identified 4 very specific areas that we believe as the institutional investment community we can help popularize that approach and then really figure out how we can seed and anchor some of these transactions and then crowd in climate finance, blended investment and the like. So one of the first actions there was to really help the implementation of these institutional investor-public partnerships by advising on qualifying the pipeline of bankable water investment projects. I think if we asked everyone on this panel, we would all have a different perspective about bankability relative to our own mandates. So we can't just say private sector and then all of a sudden it's everybody. So if we talk about institutional investors, we have a very specific mandate, a very specific focus in terms of risk and climate adjusted returns, and we can actually help filter what we think would be the most appropriate for us to be able to support. Sorry, Minister, I'm going to, if you're still here, I'm going to mention that word de-risking. It is really important. We have a very serious and very underestimated de-risking financing gap. If, on average, about 1/3 of a financing or an investment would tend to need some form of de-risking. Now, if you then think about, I don't know, $3 trillion worth of nationally determined contribution projects, what's 1/3 of that? If you then look at what's the capacity of the de-risking instruments in the market to crowd in that type of finance, you have ATI, $400 million balance sheet. You have, Go Global. You have the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, $60 billion balance sheet. So there's over $500 billion worth of de-risking gap before we even get anywhere else. So I think it's really important that we really try to figure out how to innovate. I can see the Minister leaning forward. You may have some perspectives on that. 500 billion, sir? Yeah. Right. Yes. But I think we need to really get some practicality into where the gaps are. And then I think we can actually really play a bigger role. And then lastly, we have until 2030, according to the panel, to mobilize this 10 billion from institutional investors each year. So we're going to need to use new technologies to be able to crowd in institutional investors. And there are a number of deal rooms and investor intermediation technologies that we think should really be incorporated in the practice and the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much.